The definition of CrossFit is constantly varied, functional movements executed at a high intensity. Now, when people hear that, some of them think, intensity? That means smash myself in the face with a board every single day. Well, that would be wrong. First, let's establish two things. One, what intensity is, and two, why we would use intensity. Intensity, referenced in the What is CrossFit lecture and the articles that CrossFit has put out, is talking about the amount of power derived from any given movement. In order to find that, there's many different equations. The one they reference in the book is the force times distance divided by time. It's the most basic of them. And it is a way that we can measure the average power of any given movement or task. So in the definition of CrossFit, it says constantly varied functional movements executed at high intensity. That high intensity is talking about the movement's ability to produce power. Now, there are other different definitions of intensity. Like if you look up intensity in the dictionary, it's going to say something different. If you're talking about intensity with regards to exercise science and running, as Mr. Hinshaw talks about, there is a 6 to 9 minute window referencing intensity that is where you gain adaptation with regards to VO2 max. This is not necessarily referencing that. Similar, but not that. So in the definition of CrossFit, once again, we are referencing a movement's ability to produce power. So when it says high intensity, it's wanting you to use movements that produce higher power. That's what it's talking about. Now, the reason we would do that is because movements that produce high power create quicker results. How it's stated in the book and how Greg spoke about it was intensity is the independent variable most commonly associated with maximizing the rate of return of favorable adaptation. So intensity gives you good shit fast. Now, why would getting results fast be important for a fitness program? One, because fitness should be auxiliary to the rest of your life. It should be something that you do in addition to living and having a great life that allows you to live and have an even better life. So you want to spend minimal time doing it because all it is allowing you to live the life that you want to live. So getting results quicker allows you to do that a bit better. In addition to that, we as humans tend to be pretty driven by the results that we get. So if you can show people results quicker, you can keep them easier. So one, we've established what intensity is in this definition. And two, we've established why we would use it. Now let's talk about where it goes wrong. Well, for one, people think that high intensity in the definition of CrossFit means we need to smash ourselves in the face with a board every single day. That is untrue. If your training makes it so you're puking every day, or you're doing a 12 to 15 minute Metcon every day that involves thrusters, burpees, and cleans and snatches, then you're blowing it. That is a mistake and should not be done. And nothing about that definition says that that's what you should be doing. What I will say, though, is that if somebody's only coming 2 to 3 times a week, they stand more to gain by doing a 12 to 15 minute Metcon than if they were to come in and hit a long slow day on those 2 to 3 days a week. So if someone's training less, higher intensity more often is likely going to yield better overall success. However, we don't recommend just training 2 to 3 times a week. We recommend training 4 to 5 times a week. You're going to get much more back from that. In that case, you better make sure that they're not doing 12 to 15 minute Metcons every single day. In fact, if you're doing 12 to 15 minute Metcons 5 days a week, the likelihood of burnout and or overuse and or injury is significantly higher just due to the amount of fatigue that this human's system will be under. So what do we have to do? Well, by design, a good CrossFit program should be varied. And in variance, intensity varies because of the nature of the movements that you choose to use. If you use longer, slower movements like long distance running, or if you do heavy lifting with individual focus in that heavy lift, or even a lift that is heavy relative to the type of lift that it is, something like a step up or something like a snatch or clean, which will be light systemically relative to something like a back squat or a deadlift. Even a strict press heavy day is going to have a different level of intensity than a back squat heavy day or a deadlift heavy day. So understanding that intensity varies because we use different movements is part of the program. So again, if you're not doing those days, you're missing out on a big component of what would be our program of CrossFit. I had a fight a long time ago with Mr. Sean Pastuch, where he made a statement about CrossFit's definition needing to be changed to constantly varied functional movements executed at varied intensities. And what I argued was that within the nature of constantly varied functional movements executed at high intensity, if you're varying your movements up, that high intensity will vary as well. It's very easy to misinterpret that and think that you should just be vomiting every day. But I think it takes away from the impactful statement of constantly varied functional movements executed at high intensity if you were to say varied intensities. Varied intensities is implied by the fact that we are varying the movements that we're doing. They're high relative to non-functional movements. So movements that are in isolation will not elicit the same amount of power as full body movements that we do in CrossFit, the functional movements. So high intensity is the more potent statement, but in reality, that intensity is going to vary. Where this goes wrong, like we just talked about, is if all you're doing every day is cleans, snatches, thrusters, big burpees, things like that. So can it be done wrong? For sure. But let's understand what it means and apply it correctly. I will lean back and say, though, if you're only training 2 to 3 days a week, doing higher intensity with regards to doing the big functional movements like cleans, thrusters, deads, burpees, the things I talked about before, an argument could be made that you're getting the most bang for your buck by doing 3 days that are the 12 to 15 minute AMRAPs. But if you're doing more than 3 days in a row, on average, 4 days in a row, 5 days in a row, there needs to be rest built in. There needs to be days that are heavy days. There needs to be long, slow days that will be high intensity relative to a non-functional day, like sitting around doing something where you're just doing curls and supersets of, lat raises and calf raises and crap. So in summary, CrossFit is constantly varied functional movements executed at high intensity. But high is always going to be relative to the movements that we're doing, also relative to the individual who's doing them, where they're at in their program. And we use intensity because it gives us results in a meaningful amount of time. However, if somebody's coming more than 3 days a week, we got to make sure that they're not just doing 12 to 15 minute AMRAPs all the time, which means that our program should have built into it days where the intensity naturally varies. And that should happen as a result of a good program, namely CrossFit. Thank you for watching that. Just so you know, though, that is just the tip of the iceberg. If you found that helpful and you want more content just like that, we have hundreds of these videos in the knowledge. Everything from cues and tips and tricks to theory content that will flush out your understanding of everything we do in CrossFit. If you want to learn directly from me and do weekly calls where we do homework and everything in between, we also have the Knowledge Pro. If any of this sounds like your cup of tea, just click the link in the description for a free 7-day trial.